Hello, my name is Steve Savage, as you can see from the slide, and today we're going to be talking about the control of yellow star thistle, or YST as it's often abbreviated. So let's go ahead and get started with that.
Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Phelps. The Mediterranean Cartel, known by its code name YST, has implemented a plan to completely take over rangelands and park areas in California. With their overwhelming success to date, they are now completing plans to finish the takeover. Your mission, Jim and Jill, should you decide to accept, is to eradicate all YST from your property. As usual, should you fail in your attempt, the Master Gardeners will deny all knowledge of your actions. This CD will self-destruct in 5 seconds. Good luck, Jim. Good luck, Jill.
So if you attempt to control star thistle, you may feel that this is a mission impossible. And it's a long road. It's a lot of work, and it requires a lot of persistence. But you can control yellow star thistle on your property. My property, a little over 3 acres, was totally covered with it when we moved there, and there's no star thistle on it today. It's just a process, as you will see. So today our topics are the origin, distribution, and impact of star thistle, how you identify it, the culture, what something I call control program design factors. Then there's control mechanisms that can be used, and finally strategic planning for control. Before I actually start, when we teach this class in person, which hopefully we'll be doing again before too long, I give a couple of handouts, and I'll talk about them. But the other thing is we hand out a evaluation form at the end, and there are 2 things that show up quite frequently on that evaluation form. One of them that are critical. One of them is that why are you telling me about all these seeds and these flowers and the roots and all that stuff? Just tell me how to control the stuff. And my answer to that is that it's really necessary to understand the physiology, I think, of the plant, how it grows, how it's able to grow in the summertime when everything else is dying, how it produces seeds, the kinds of seeds it produces, because all of that factors into the mechanisms you might use to actually control the star thistle. So I think it's important. I hope you do too by the time we get to the end of this thing. The other thing that I get from folks is that, well, you didn't tell me how to control star thistle on my property. And they're absolutely right, I didn't. And the reason I didn't is I haven't got a clue. I do not know how to control star thistle on your property. And the reason I don't know that is I don't know your property. What's the extent of the infestation? What's the property look like to begin with? What's the surrounding situation? Is that clear of star thistle, or is that covered with star thistle as well? What kind of time are you willing to spend? How much money are you willing to spend? There's just myriad things that I have no knowledge of. And so for me to try to tell you how to control star thistle on your property would be ridiculous. But what I can do, and what I hope to do in this class, again, is tell you the physiology of the plant, and then to give you some control mechanisms and some control strategies and how to plan to eliminate the problem. And that's what you should take away. Then you go home, look at your property, survey it, decide what you want to do, what you can do, what you're willing to do, and come up with your own plan to control the star thistle on your property. So I hope that's fairly clear. I'm not going to tell you how to control star thistle in your property. I'm sorry. So let's get really started into this thing then. What's the origin of star thistle? Well, it is a member of the sunflower family, and specifically thistles, native to Eurasia, the Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey, along the coast, Israeli areas, Syria, on up, probably further inland as well. That's where it actually originated. So we could say the Balkans, Asia Minor, the Middle East. It was introduced into Chile in the 1600s by the Spanish as they began to explore the New World and settle it. And Chile, actually, the coastal regions are a Mediterranean climate, which star thistle is a Mediterranean climate plant. So they brought their cattle, their horses, their sheep, their goats, all this stuff over there, and then they needed to have forage for those animals, and so then they imported alfalfa seed to grow forage for those animals. Unfortunately, that alfalfa seed was also contaminated with star thistle seed. And so once it got into Chile, it grew just as well as the alfalfa did, and then it began to spread. Remember, in the Middle East, there are lots of natural enemies for star thistle, which keep it under control, which we'll talk about later. But in Chile, there were no natural enemies, and so it really went crazy. So that introduced the problem to the New World in South America. It was introduced then into California somewhere around 1849 to 1850. It's not exactly sure exactly when that happened. It was, and again, the mechanism was as the Spaniards moved up into Southern California and then on up into Central California. Once again, they brought their livestock with them, and then once again they wanted to grow fodder for them, so they brought up the alfalfa seed from Chile into California. And once again, obviously, that seed was contaminated with star thistle seed. And so once again, the star thistle was introduced into California. And once again, there are no natural enemies. And so the star thistle began to spread. So that's kind of how it started. It was first noticed in California around 1851, sometime in that region, and it was in the Marysville area. It was undoubtedly there for longer than that, but those are the first recorded sightings of it in that area. It then began to slowly spread, filling in areas around Marysville, Sacramento, and on down towards the San Francisco area. So the initial spread then was from Chile up through about 1903, somewhere in that range. And then after that, it began to come into the state through alfalfa brought in from Spain, from France, Italy, and probably Turkey also. All those areas now had been contaminated with this same star thistle. So the initial transfer mechanism then was the alfalfa seed. That was the initial transmission mechanism, and it mostly again stayed in that Sacramento, Marysville, San Francisco, that kind of triangle up through about the 1930s. But starting somewhere then in the 1930s, it began to move up the hillsides of the valley, on both sides of the valley, into the grasslands of the foothills, and it was spread then primarily by wildlife, and then also by the livestock, which was beginning to spread out into those areas also, and bringing the star thistle seed with them in their hides, in their hooves, and probably even in their excrement as well. So by somewhere, I don't know, 1958, somewhere late 50s, let's say, there were about 1 million acres that were contaminated with star thistle in California. All right. Since 1960, the expansion has primarily been caused by a number of things. First of all, was construction of the interstate highway system. And with that, then the use of road fill and which brought contaminated road fill brought star thistle and moved it around the state. The interstate trucking industry, which again, the star thistle would grow on the sides of the highway, the seed would get on the highway, picked up by the wheels and the undercarriage of trucks and cars too, and hauled around. So it was that. It was also the spread of ranching. Rangelands where, again, cattle were moving around, alfalfa seeds moving around, the cattle are spreading it. Just a number of things then that we're doing, and also the suburban growth as well with spreading it around. So that anyway, by about 1985 or so, there are about 8 million acres in California were actually contaminated then by star thistle. Star thistle isn't just a California problem. As you can see here, the black dune areas are basically the Mediterranean climate areas of the world. Now, some of those in Europe aren't, but it started out that way. And all those areas now are contaminated with star thistle. Again, starting out, as you can see there on the west coast of South America and Chile, and then on the west coast of the US, and moving through all these Mediterranean climate areas. Actually, this slide is about, as you can see, is about 1985. So we're a ways beyond that. And actually, that star thistle contamination in the US, at any rate, has now moved on up into Western Canada to the limit of its growth range. It's moved to fill out pretty much all of the Western US west of the Rocky Mountains. It's moved into some of the plain states. It's moved into New York, if you believe that. So it is a continuing problem and an increasing problem worldwide. And again, the mechanism from the 60s again was this construction of the interstate system and just a more robust road system, road construction and maintenance, spreading it with road fill, that sort of stuff, undercarriage of vehicles, and the movement of contaminated and uncertified hay and straw and uncertified seed. All did it. Locally, the spread over shorter distances is through, again, animals and humans. Contaminated farm equipment, for example, will spread it around. Contaminated lawn tractors. You go out and you mow an area that has star thistle in it, and you don't thoroughly clean your equipment, you'll have seed embedded in there. You come over and mow another area that doesn't have star thistle, some of that seed will fall off, and voila, you have star thistle growing over there. And then fill and mulch, stuff like that, also spreads it around if you're not careful and if it isn't clean and free of star thistle seeds. So anyway, the bottom line is that by today, star thistle contaminates somewhere around 15 million acres of California. And this it's found, as you can see from this slide, in about 57 or 58 counties. And again, this slide is 2006, so it's very possible it's in all 58 counties by now. And this just shows, again, this is a relatively old slide. I think this is 2001, so it's 20 years old, but it shows the areas in dark brown of the heaviest infestations at that time, and then the yellow areas are varying degrees of lesser infestation. Now, if this map were redone today, 20 years later, I'm sure you would find the heavy infestation over a much broader area, and probably actually this whole area would have at least some star thistle contamination. So it's not just a California problem again. So let's talk a little bit then about the impact. Star thistle is very deep rooted. The taproot goes down a long way, and that's really what allows the plant to survive the dry summers of a Mediterranean climate, because it's tapping soil moisture way down several feet deep. So when the upper levels of the soil dry out, and so most of the other plants die or go into hibernation, I guess, the star thistle doesn't have to. And now the contamination has been, or I'm losing my word here. The competition has been eliminated now, or at least greatly reduced, and so that opens up the field of the star thistle, and it goes crazy. Okay, it is, as we all know, it's a summer growing plant. And again, it's able to grow. It fills a niche. Then it isn't being filled by other plants because they've all gone dormant. And the star thistle now is one of the few things that can tap the deep moisture and keep right on growing. The result of this then is it creates a loss of access to rangelands as it covers up the rangelands where like cattle would out be trying to graze. They don't like star thistle any more than what we do. Those thorn-like needles around the flower heads stick them just the way they stick us. And so they don't like that, and they're less likely to graze in that area. The other thing is, as it outcompetes everything else, that rangeland becomes useless anyway, because it just can't be grazed beyond a certain point of the star thistle's development. It reduces well, let me go back. It says it takes up so much foraging space that is actually reduced the value of pasture lands by about 7%. And again, that's an old number, so I'm sure it's at least that high, if not higher now. Obviously, then it reduces the recreational values of parklands and things like this as well, because again, as they become contaminated with star thistle, people don't want to go out into that and get stuck with the star thistle. Something that's very important to remember for those of you who have horses, if you don't already know, and I hope you do, but star thistle is also toxic to horses. Horses won't generally eat star thistle on their own as long as there's other things for them to graze on. But if there are not other things for them to graze on, then they will graze the star thistle. And they will, once they've started to eat it, they will continue to eat it. And the effect of the consumption of the star thistle is a cumulative effect over a period of somewhere around 30 to 60 days. There's a toxin in the star thistle that causes the horse to develop a neurological disease. And I'm going to read that to you because I can never remember it. It's called nigropalladial encephalomalacia, or chewing disease, which probably is what you really want to remember. And what it does is it leads to brain lesions and to mouth ulcers, which in most cases then the horse dies, either from starvation or dehydration or both. So the bottom line there's no known treatment for it. So the bottom line there is that you don't want your horses to graze star thistle, so don't. The other problem, one of many, that star thistle does is it reduces the biological diversity of the land. When star thistle gets in there so thick that it crowds out all the other vegetation, and you can certainly drive around and see that, then we lose the biological diversity of that vegetation. But it doesn't just stop there. Any of the insects and small animals that depended upon that natural vegetation for their livelihoods, they go away too, because that's gone. And so what you wind up with is this homogeneous, biologically sterile area of star thistle. And again, it degrades the animal and plant habitat, which we kind of already discussed that. So I'll show you this slide here. Star thistle is a voracious consumer of groundwater. It uses up to 50% of the stored groundwater during its life cycle. In the Sacramento Valley watershed alone, then, the economic loss is estimated to be around $75 million annually. And again, that's an old number, so it's probably higher today, if nothing else driven up by inflation, but probably higher today in real terms as well. So what I'd like you to look at on this slide are really only two things. One is the green line, and the other is that kind of fadey yellow line at the top. And then pay attention to the right side of the graph, the vertical line on the right side, which shows you the percent of soil water, which is a measure of the amount of water contained in the soil. The green line, or the yellow line rather, represents the soil water without star thistle. And you can see it starts out there in the early part of the growing season at about, what is that, 25%, something like that, trying to read across the side there. And by the end of the season, it's come down by about 5%. So it's now down around 20% without star thistle. Now look at the green line. If you've got a star thistle contamination in that rangeland, pasturage or whatever, then that again, it starts out a concentration of water at about 25%, but by the end of the growing season, it's down to around 12%, or not 12%, 8%. So 8 from 25, whatever that is, 17%. So you've lost 17% of the water that was stored in the soil, and that's mainly due to the use of the water by star thistle. So it is a voracious consumer of groundwater. So what about the cost of controlling this stuff? Well, in California, the cost to control star thistle on just a 500,000 acres is about $25 per acre, or that runs up around like $12–15 million for a half million acres. And remember, we have 15 million acres. So you're trying to control this stuff is just really a very expensive proposition, probably doomed to failure anyway. Just using pouring money into it, I don't know. You might get control, but it would be a long process and a very, very expensive process. It also contaminates the grain harvest. So if you're a grower of wheat or barley or oats or anything like that, if you don't keep the star thistle out of your grain field, the seed there will contaminate the grain, and that reduces the value of your crop. So, uncontaminated crop, a bushel of wheat, say, and I don't know what it really is, but let's say it's $30, but that star thistle contamination in there may cut that value by half. So if you're a grain producer, that's a heck of a hit to take. So it's a really bad problem. It also overtakes parks, it overtakes trails, it overtakes hillsides, and we've pretty much already talked about that, so I'm not going to belabor the point. So what about identification of star thistle? Well, as you can see here, for many control methods to work, especially chemical ones, identifying star thistle in its early growth stages is critical. And the early growth stages are the cotyledonous stage, the young seedling stage, and at least the early rosette stage. Unfortunately, these can be the most difficult periods in the life cycle of star thistle to identify it, because it's mixed. It's small. It looks like a lot of other stuff. It's mixed in with a lot of other stuff. So it's just concealed, and it's very difficult to find. In the cotyledonous stage, it's virtually impossible to identify it. In the young seedling and then in the rosette stages, one thing that you want to look for is the classic and typical arrow-shaped leaf, and you can see that one in the young seedling stage. They're coming down towards the bottom, and then of course once it gets into the rosette stage, you have lots of these arrow-shaped leaves. So that's kind of the thing you're looking for. So here we are then in the young seedling stage, and you can see here that some of the leaves are just beginning to develop that arrow shape. The one up there in the upper left-hand plant, you can see coming off horizontally to the right. The plant down in the center lower, the one going up to the top, are all beginning to develop it. But at this stage, again, maximum effectiveness if you're using chemical controls or hoeing or pulling or anything else, but the most difficult time to try to identify this. As we get then from the young seedling stage into the rosette stage, it becomes a little bit easier to identify it. And then we go into what's called the bolting stage, and then finally the flowering stage, where it develops those nasty little spikes that penetrate your clothes, your socks, and even your tennis shoes if you're wearing tennis shoes. So with that, then we put this slide up. We're having an in-person class, and I asked the folks to identify the star thistle plants in here. So have fun, see if you can find them. And I'll help you out just a little bit here. If you look in the top right, about a third of the way down, you see that kind of silver arrowy shaped leaves sticking up. That's star thistle. Come straight down from that to the and you'll see another silvery kind of greeny silver leaf, arrow shaped. That is a star thistle in there too. I wish I could point these out to you, but I don't think I can do that. If you come across the bottom third over on kind of the left-hand side, you'll see another little clump of arrow-shaped and silvery colored leaves. That's probably star thistle. And there's other star thistle in here, but you can have fun finding it if you can. But you see the magnitude of the problem here. In the early stages, when it's easiest to control, it's the hardest to find. And I'll give you some strategies which will help you do that later on in the talk. So what's the what's the culture here? Well, we're going to talk about its adaptations to climate, its germination, its development, its seed viability, and its transfer. So the first one then is the climate. Now we've already said it's a Mediterranean climate beast, and guess what? We live in a Mediterranean climate, so it obviously would be very happy locating here. As far as rain goes, it survives over a wide range of rainfall, anywhere from as little as 10 inches up to as much as 60 inches of rain per year. Seed production, however, is highly dependent on the amount of rain it gets. More rain, at least up to a certain point, means more seed. You get a more healthy, more vigorous plant. Less rain, a less healthy, less vigorous plant, you get less seed. So that can be a control mechanism where if you have dry years, you may find it easier to get out there and get started to control the stuff as opposed to a wet year when you've got lots of bushy plants that are really healthy and producing a lot of seed. Star thistle again uses about 6.5 inches. This is just a gee whiz. That's okay. Star thistle uses about 6.5 inches of water, averaged throughout the soil depth over 1 year, and that is as much as an oak tree consumes over the same time and space, to give you an idea of the problem there. So what about temperature? Well, it survives anything from cool to hot, generally in elevations below 6,000 feet. So that means it gets up into the upper foothills now. With the changing in our climate, the warming of our climate that is occurring, warmer temperatures are occurring higher up in the Sierra. So that is a pretty good indicator that star thistle will be marching upward in the Sierra also. And in fact, I think we're already seeing star thistle up in some of the areas at 6,000 feet and higher. So that's going to be a real problem as things warm, is that star thistle will move up into the upper elevation. What about sun? Well, it is a sun-loving plant. It does not like shade. And you can see that very, very well. If you have a property, or if you go along a creek bed where you've got trees and things growing there, it doesn't have to be a full running creek year round. It can be just a creek that flows in the winter. But you've got trees, you got shrubs, you get a lot of shade. You don't find star thistle underneath that. But as you move out from that shade canopy where the shade lessens, you begin to see more and more star thistle until you get out into the open areas, and there you see a lot of star thistle then. In fact, reducing the amount of light by 30% reduces seed production by 67%. So a 1/3 roughly reduction of light leads to a 2/3 reduction of seed production, which would also suggest a control strategy that could be used. So most weed seed then germinates over a relatively short period of time, 30 to perhaps 60 days, usually in the spring, late winter, and on into the early and mid-spring after the winter rains. That's when the seed germinates. That makes them fairly easy to control because you can go out there and you can plow them up, you can poison them, you can do all kinds of good things, and you can do it about one time, maybe two, and you've eliminated the problem of whatever it was you were trying to get rid of. That is not true with star thistle. Star thistle germinates after the first seeds begin to germinate after the first good rain in the fall. And then they will germinate continuously then, new flushes, new germinations of seed after every rainfall, all the way up through whenever the rain stops, which could be in our area. It might be late March, it might be April, it might be May, it could even be early June. And after each of those rains, star thistle seeds, you'll get a new flush of star thistle growing. That makes trying to control it a nightmare, because you can go out and destroy it after the first or second flushes, and then you'll get a third flush, and you go out and destroy that, and you get a fourth flush, and then you destroy that, and you get a fifth flush. So you're constantly out there fighting this stuff, trying to get rid of it. It's a frustrating task. And then, as I've already said, then it's really hard to identify the star thistle, as we've seen, when control is most effective in its early growth stages. So what about development of roots? Well, most of the plant's initial energy after germination goes into root development, not top growth. So you go out there and you'll see this little rosette of star thistle growing, and then you can go back a week, you can go back 3 or 4 weeks later, and that won't have gotten very much bigger. A little, but not a lot. And so you think, well, it's not growing very fast, not a problem. You know, why worry about it? What is important is what's going on underground, because that root is sinking down deep into the soil to tap into that deep soil moisture, which enables the plant again to survive in the summer months. So that means then that I don't know if you can see this well. I can see it pretty well here. Here we have the top of the star thistle, the rosette, and it's very small. That's a pocket knife there, starting out at the growth crown. And what's a pocket knife? 5 inches or something like that. So that's about 4 of those pocket knives length of root. And that's in just a few days to weeks. That root has gone down 20 inches, perhaps. It goes to 6 inches in days, and here it's down 20 inches in perhaps just a few weeks. Put another way, if you'd like, that's a yardstick there, 3 feet. So we can see here that in 24 days, I hope you can see this, the root is down just, that's at about 8 or 9 inches, something like that in 24 days. In 31 days, however, it's down almost 3/4 of the length of that yardstick, and by I think it's 38 days. It's very hard to see, and I hope it's not as hard for you to see as it is for me. That's down to more than 3 feet. If you look out there to about 52 days, that root has gone down all the way. You can see the roots actually trailing out to the left. So it's almost 2 yardsticks long, or about 6 feet. And that's after 52 days. And look at what the top growth has done during that time. It's growing, but not nearly like what those roots are growing. So there you have it. That's one reason you can't pull it up if you don't get it really, really early, because all you do is just snap the root off at the growth crown, and it easily regenerates itself from the remaining roots and from the growth crown. And of course, when the soil starts to dry out, you can't get it pulled out anyway. And again, you break it off at the growth crown, and it just comes right back again fairly rapidly. So again, slow initial growth in the winter. Usually it's prostrate in open areas, but don't be fooled. It can grow upright if it's got competition. When I was out clearing my property, for example, I'm out there walking through it, and I see this plant growing up kind of vertically. I said, well, you know, that looks like star thistle, but star thistle is supposed to be horizontal, not vertical. And so I walked on, and I said, you know, darn, that looks like star thistle. I went back and looked, pulled some of the grasses and other weeds away, and sure enough, it was star thistle, and it was growing vertically because it was looking for sunlight. It was trying to compete with those other plants. So if it had stayed horizontal, it couldn't have done that very well. So it can, I guess the bottom line here is it can grow vertical. Don't be fooled if you go out there and see something that looks like star thistle, but growing vertical and you don't think it is. It probably is. So bolting then occurs as the competition dies off, and then the star thistle can see the sun. It's got plenty of light. Its roots are now fully developed. It's tapping into the water deep in the soil, and now it bolts, as you can see here. You probably all see these things. In this particular stage, then, the plant is developing features that are going to help it survive the hot, dry conditions of the summer. For one thing, you can see here the plant is pretty green, but as the bolting stage progresses, that color changes from this kind of darker shade of green to a lighter colored green, to maybe blue green or gray green, or even to a silvery color. And the reason for that is it helps the plant reflect sunlight, which keeps the plant cooler during those hot summer days. The leaves also become more sparse, and that allows for the plant to, again, to radiate heat better, but it also cuts down on the amount of transpiration that's going on, which means it's conserving the water that whatever water has access to is being conserved because transpiration has been reduced. And then finally, yeah, I don't know if you can see them on here, but there's wings along the stems. And those wings, again, act as radiators to help the plant radiate heat and keep itself cool. So these are the development stages then of star thistle. And I usually give this as a handout when we have the class in person. But you can see that the seedling stage starts out somewhere at the end of October, early November, and then it extends over a large period of time, all the way into early May. And again, if it keeps raining, it'll keep the seeds that are on the soil will keep germinating all the way into June if it rains into June. Then you have the rosette stage. Finally, the vegetative stage. Again, these are just average numbers, but from April into about August, somewhere in there. Floral bud, the flowering stage, seed formation, and then seed maturation, which generally occurs sometime end of May, early June, and can go all the way into the end of September. And then finally, you get seed dispersal, and then you get the senescence, where the plant begins to die off. Fortunately, this plant is an annual, not a perennial. If it was a perennial, I don't know what we'd do. We'd all go crazy, I think. Okay, so that gets us into seed viability. The thing to remember here, there are two types of seeds. There's the lighter color seed, which has these hairs sticking out of it. You can see those are called pappus, and then you have the darker colored seed that has no pappus. When this seed germinates then and grows and produces flowers, the floral initiation and viable seed, from the time of floral initiation, that is the opening of the flower and the production of viable seed from that flower, is about 8 days roughly. So if you haven't controlled star thistle by then, you got 8 more days. You better get busy, otherwise you pretty much lost the war for this time of year. And in general, if you're looking at a patch of star thistle, I'll mention this again. If you're looking at a patch of star thistle there's no viable seed present until you got about 2% of the buds have actually opened up into flowers. From the time that you get 2% floral initiation, they call it, that's when your 8 days start. If you've got this big patch of star thistle, that's when your 8 days start. And then after that 8 days, again, you might as well pack up your gear, go home, and plan what you're going to do next year. So the lighter colored seeds then, with the bristly hair on top, the pappus, these disperse very quickly after the seed matures, and they germinate with the onset of the fall rains. And they will continue to germinate then after each rainstorm in the fall, all the way up through December, January, somewhere in there. The dark seeds without the pappus then, they stay on the flower head until that flower head disintegrates, which is in midwinter. So we're talking here January. And then those seeds germinate from that period on into spring. Okay, double header. Again, makes the plant very hard to control. So seed production per plant actually varies quite a lot. It ranges from around a low of 700 up to as many as 10,000 seeds per plant if you got a really healthy buffo bushy plant. The bad news about all that is about 95% of those seeds are viable. The concentration of seed in the soil can range anywhere from 1 to 2,000 seeds per square meter, roughly 3 by 3 feet at the low end, to as many as 10 to 12,000 seeds per square meter at the high end. But it can range as high as 29,000 seeds per square meter. The seed survives in the soil for the most part about 3 years. And you can see here that the seed death averages 60 to 80% per year. So 80% die off at the first year, 94% at the second year, and about 97% at the third year. However, that doesn't mean you're done with it, because if we look at this slide, you can see that after a year, you had 5,000 seeds. By the second year, you got only 1,250, 313 at the third, 78 at the fourth. But look down there at the seventh year. You got 1 seed. You think, well, that's pretty good. I can just knock it off and not worry about it after year 3 or maybe year 4 if I really am enthusiastic and have a lot of energy. Not. If you don't, you've got to eliminate all the seed in the soil in order to get control of this beast. And you got to keep any more seed from getting into the soil too. Talk about it in a minute. But if you let that 1 seed per square meter survive and that seed germinates and you don't do anything about that germinated plant, so you got, on average, you got 1 plant per square meter now. Remember, that's going to be probably a really buffo plant because it doesn't have much competition from the other plants, other star thistle plants. So it can produce as many as 10 to 20,000 seeds. So where are you? You're back at the beginning. So you have got, if you're going to control this thing, you've got to plan on a 7-year program. Sorry, but that's the way it is. You've got to prepare to wage war for 7 years. And it doesn't end there, because even if you eliminate all the seed in the soil at the end of that 7th year, and you brush your hands off and you walk away and say, I'm done, I got it under control. Well, yeah, you do, but no, you don't, because new seed will be brought in by various animals, birds, even you may track in new seeds. And if you don't keep those seeds will germinate. If you don't keep them from producing seed, once again, you're back at square one. So even after 7 years, you can't walk away. You got to go out there and watch and see what's happening and destroy any plants that may germinate before they produce new seeds. That's the nature of the beast, folks. I'm sorry. Contrary to popular belief, the wind is not a good transmitter of the seed. The seed does not, some of them have the little hairy things on it, but it's not like a dandelion. It's got that little parachute on it that just drifts in the wind, or even bull thistle or milk thistle have that little parachute that it drifts in the wind. Star thistle seed does not have that. The vast majority of the seed, about 92%, as you can see from the slide, falls within 2 feet of the plant. Well, if you have one plant and you let that go, 1 year it's 2 feet away, the next year it's 4 feet away, the next year you can see that pretty soon you've got full coverage. Again, we've talked about this, but the seed spreads via gravel, fill dirt, equipment, animals, hay and straw used for erosion control. All these things are how the star thistle spreads, not so much by the wind. So what I'd like to talk a little bit then about something called, I got an eyelash in my eye here. I want to talk about something called control program design factors. Control, if you haven't got it by now, control requires a systematic and persistent effort over a number of years in order to get rid of the star thistle. The bottom line is you've got to be just as persistent as the star thistle if you think you're going to get rid of it. It may be necessary to control the star thistle not only on your property, but on the property of your neighbors if they're contaminated too. And the best way to do that would be, and we'll talk about this later on too, but the best way would be to talk to your neighbors and say, hey, I'm going to try to control the star thistle on my property. Would you like to join me in the effort? And they may say yes, which is the best situation. They may say no, which is the worst. But then you can ask them, hey, would you mind if I came over 5 to 10 feet into your property to control star thistle? And what you're doing there is you're setting up a border around your property to keep the star thistle out of your property, and any battle that needs to be fought is in that 5 to 10 foot strip on their property, okay? So if your goal is totally eradicate, you've got a lot of star thistle on your property and you want to totally eradicate it, then you must eradicate or eliminate all the seed production. You cannot let plants develop, grow, flower, and produce new seeds. You cannot let that happen. Then you need to deplete the seed reservoir that's in the soil, which we talked about. That's 7-year business. And then we need to prevent outside seed from being introduced. If you fail to prevent outside seed from being introduced, or if it is, destroy those plants before they seed. And if you let any plants that do grow develop seed, mature seeds, then you've lost the battle that year. You might as well go home, watch a football game, and think about what you're going to do next year. So what about if you have some star thistle on your property, but you're not really, you know, live and let live. It's okay. It's not bothering me a whole lot. All you want to do is manage it so it doesn't get any worse. If you do that, if that's your plan, then you must reduce the plant density, seed and the plant height, and the canopy size, all of which relate to seed production and how much seed will be produced. Okay. Then you need to prevent any star thistle patches that exist from developing into solid stands. So the management strategy there is let the patches that exist, okay, but don't let them spread, don't let them get bigger, because they will, and they'll eventually cover your property. Say you have star thistle out in the back part of your property, but most of your property is clear. It's just the back part is got a lot of star thistle in it, and you're fine with that. I don't care. It's good. As long as it stays over there, it's all right. Okay. If that's the case, then you need to define the boundaries around the infested areas and basically tell the star thistle, hey, I'm good with you growing on that side of the line. Cross the line, I'm going to kill you. Okay, so you need to, again, eliminate the outlying patches and solitary plants that are on the wrong side of the boundary. All right, that's your strategy. And then finally, you don't have any star thistle on your property, and you want to keep it that way. You need to eliminate and isolate isolated plants. If you're bringing in seed, hay, fill soil, road building materials, you need to make sure it's certified star thistle seed free. That's hard to say. You need to clean equipment and vehicles that have been maybe out in areas where there is star thistle, because again, it can be attached to get into the tires, it can get into the undercarriage, and then you drive it onto the uncontaminated area. The seed drops off and germinates, and there you go. You need to examine nursery stock and plantings. Again, I've not really found that to be a great, huge problem. Nurseries are pretty good about that, but it doesn't hurt to at least be cognizant of the fact that you could import a star thistle seed, plant, whatever. So if you see a star thistle growing around a newly planted plant, then probably that came in the pot. Eliminate it. And then finally, as I mentioned, if you got your neighbors all have star thistle all over the place, your best bet is to try to get their permission or get their help in eliminating it on their property, or at least give you permission to go over there and clear it out on a 5 to 10 foot band, and you fight your battles over there rather than fighting them on your property. And that's what I do, by the way, because my neighbors do have star thistle on their property. So with that, then let's talk. There are several control options. Mechanical, and that includes hand pulling, hoeing, weed whip, tillage, mowing. Biological, insects and fungus introductions. Cultural, such as grazing and burning. Chemical, go spray Roundup. And then there's an integrated where you may have maybe you do some burning, you do some chemical control, and then follow that by revegetation, for example. So let's get then to the control mechanisms that we have. Mowing, tillage, which I'm not going to discuss because most of us don't have big, large properties where we're going to be out there with a tiller or with a cultivator of some sort, driving up and down, disking up the land. So I'm not even going to talk about that in the interest of time. Grazing, fire, I'm not going to talk about. This class is being recorded in October of 2021. or actually, yeah, the end of October, and probably be broadcast on Zoom at least in November 2021. We've just come out of a terrible fire season, the Calder fire, the Dixie fire, and on and on, fires and fires. We really don't need to burn, and most of us don't have a large enough pieces of property to burn anyway. You're usually going to use burning if you're a rancher and you got large acreage of grazing land. That's when you would use burning as control. I don't think most of us don't need to do that. So we're not going to bother with it. We're going to talk about herbicides, biocontrol, manual control, competition, and then finally the timing of all that stuff. So the first thing in is mowing. And the key, the prime considerations that should be factored in to a decision about whether you're going to use mowing as a control strategy or not are the plant structure and then the timing. In other words, when do I mow? So plants with lots of, let's look at the plants, the two plants on the left picture there. The plants with lots of basal growth, which is the plant on the left, are generally not good candidates for mowing. The reason for that is that the basal growth there is usually pretty horizontal. So you can't set your mower low enough to destroy it. What you do is you chop off the top part of it. The basal structure below is still there, and it's going to just regenerate, and it's going to regenerate very quickly. And when it does that, it's instead of having just the one or two branches coming up, it's going to have multiple branches. And then if you come out there and mow it again, you're going to create even more multiple branches. I don't know if any of you grow chrysanthemums, but you know, if you're a chrysanthemum aficionado and you want great big flowers, you take away all the stems, but just one or maybe two, clear off any buds and leave you one flower bud there, and that will produce your prize-winning giant chrysanthemum. Most of us don't want that. Most of us want a nice big full bush chrysanthemum with lots and lots of flowers, a mound of beautiful flowers. And so we go out in June and we shear back the plant, which produces more branches. And then about in early July, we shear it back again, which produces even more branches. And all those branches then will produce one or more flower buds. So that by the time fall comes around, we have this wonderful mound bush full of flowers. You can achieve the same effect by mowing that plant. You will get multiple branching, multiple flowers, until you get a wonderful, lovely looking plant, something like the one in the picture on the right, which is covered with flowers and full of seeds, okay? So these are not good candidates for mowing. Now the plant on the right, see how spindly that is? That is a good candidate for mowing, because when you mow that plant, you're hopefully going to chop it down below where that growth is. Will the plant recover? Probably. Will the plant recover and make a nice, huge, bushy plant? Probably not. It'll be a fairly spindly plant with fewer flowers and therefore fewer seeds. So that is the direction you want to go. So the timing, we talked about this. The best mowing time is at first flower. And what you're looking here, you can see this star thistle has lots and lots of buds on there, flower buds, but only a few are actually opened into full flower. So what you're looking for is 2% coverage or less. That's when you want to mow. At 2% coverage, you have about 8 days, and then you're going to have viable seeds. So that's your last opportunity to knock this thing down. Okay, so what's your having a little trouble here. So if you must mow during the bolting stage, for example, then when the plant is fairly vertical, then you want to mow it as low as you absolutely can mow, less than 4 inches if possible, to remove the maximum amount of foliage and to cause as much damage to the plant as you possibly can. Hopefully the plant will fail to restart growth. It probably will, but maybe not. But even if it does restart growth, it will be slow to recover, and so it will again produce fewer flowers, hopefully. You will almost certainly have to remow multiple times. So again, then mowing works primarily because done at the proper time, the soil moisture, which is at this kind of 2% flower, the soil moisture is more nearly depleted. Okay, so that means it's more difficult for the plant to recover. That's the whole modus operandi, I guess, between about mowing. Is you damage the plant, soil moisture level has been decreased, and the plant has a tougher time regenerating. It will, but it'll be less healthy when it does, and less healthy means fewer seeds. Mowing is most effective then done in the second or third year, actually as a follow-up strategy to some other control mechanism. And the reason for that is you've controlled it with some other mechanism. It could be herbicides, you know, in big rangelands. It could be fire, these sorts of things. So you've got it kind of under control. You've replanted with maybe perennial grasses or something of that nature. And so you've introduced a whole lot of competition. So now when you mow, you've got fewer plants. They're a little bit more stressed because they're being more competing with the grasses or whatever it is you've planted to compete with them, and so you get a better control. So that's when it's done the best. Unfortunately, the best time to mow it is also the time of highest fire danger. So there you are. So the mower timing mower timing is absolutely critical. We're actually playing into star thistle's strengths when we mow at the wrong time. Done too soon, then it adds light, which the plant loves, and it's going to take off. You've reduced the competition. You've increased the basal foliage and branching, which we know what that does. Remember the chrysanthemums, and you've reduced the competition. So all those things done at the wrong time, you're actually selecting for star thistle rather than eliminating the star thistle. In other words, you're making the problem worse. Rough terrain can be a problem because you'll get mower skips, and then the star thistle will grow down in those low spots. And that then will serve as a seed reservoir, a place of seed production, then to produce more seeds to go ahead and reseed the area. And I have a picture of that later on, which I'll show you. So will mowing be an effective strategy? Well, let's, one way when you're planning, hey, am I going to use mowing so as a strategy? Go out, you're planning your strategy in the late fall and in the winter season. Go out and look where the star thistle was growing last year. If those skeletons were spindly, then it would indicate the plant was spindly. Then that's perhaps a good candidate where mowing would be most effective. If on the other hand, the skeletons are nice and bushy, then that's probably a bad candidate. So what we're talking about is this. The one on the left was probably a really buffo, healthy plant, and mowing may not be a good strategy out in that area. But if you got lots of spindly plants like the one on the right, that probably is a good candidate. So looking at the skeletons can not only tell you where the star thistle is, if it isn't all over your property, but it's in patches, but it can tell you whether mowing is actually going to be an effective strategy. So let's move on to grazing as a control mechanism. Actually, grazing is a good component of the diet of cattle, for example. In the bolting stage, it produces as much as 13% crude protein. So it's really a very good component of the animal's diet. No horses, remember, no horses. The best time to do it is in May or in June. And the reason for that is that, first of all, hopefully the spines have not formed on the plant. The plant is not flowering yet, doesn't have the buds, the spines haven't formed. Once the spines forms, cattle and sheep won't graze it. Would you? Goats still will, but cattle and sheep won't. So that is the best time. And this is also the best time as far as it reduces the growth and seed production of the plant. If done improperly, it again can actually select for star thistle. Again, if you do it too early, in other words, because again, it reduces the competition, it opens up the rosettes to the sunlight, and away they go. And if it's too early, the cattle, sheep, whatever, can't graze it anyway because they can't. The rosette is down there lying flat on the ground, and they can't get their noses down there and get their teeth on the plant to actually chew on it. So you've eliminated competition, opened the rosette up to sunlight, and they can't damage the rosette because they can't get down to eat it. So done too early, you're selecting for star thistle. You got to do it at the right time. And again, that's what this thing says: no grazing prior to May. So the way you're going to do that then is graze 6 to 8 weeks in total, an initial graze followed by 1 to 3 follow-up grazings at 2-week intervals. So the correct way, once again, start in May, graze 1 to 2 weeks, no graze for 1 to 3 weeks. It just depends on how fast the plant is regenerating, and then repeat that cycle. That is the correct way to do it. The incorrect way, as I've said, start in March or May. You may graze a couple of weeks, no graze for a week, repeat the cycle 3 times. And what you're doing here is you're selecting for star thistle. And you're actually increasing the plant density and the seed heads, unless you do something else to follow up on the grazing. The actual frequency and the number of cycles depends on the regrowth rate. And the regrowth rate depends on rainfall occurrences and available soil moisture. So you got to look at those things, and that's going to give you a fairly good idea, at least, of how many grazing cycles you're going to have to do. Mainly, you're watching for regrowth and then knocking the stuff back down. Remember that grazing is not going to eliminate star thistle. It's just going to keep it down. That's all it's going to do. So grazing with animals, then, obviously, like once again, I emphasize this, no horses. Other types of livestock don't really matter. Cattle, sheep, goats, doesn't matter. Remember that you're not going to put one goat, one cow, whatever out there and graze on your 2 or 3 acres and have any effect whatsoever. You won't. The grazing animals must be concentrated. For example, as you can see here, 1,900 goats per 1,000 acres. So if you've got 2 or 3 acres, you need 50 or 60 goats, for example, out there grazing this stuff in order to get any kind of an effect at all. Remember too that the spines can stick in the hooves and the hides of these animals. And so if you move them over to an area that isn't contaminated with star thistle, when they've been out grazing in an area that is, especially if that area it maybe has some seed already, or if there's still seed in the ground, lying on the surface of the ground, particularly, that seed can stick in their hooves and can be transferred over into another area. Cattle and sheep avoid star thistle once again once the buds produce spines. Goats, on the other hand, will continue to browse it right into the flowering stage when those spines form. There's a thing called Rent-A-Goat, and these phone numbers and website, I think, are still effective. The cost for Rent-A-Goat, about anywhere from $1,500 to $4,500 per acre, and that depends pretty much on the amount of other work to be done to prep the site for the goats. For example, clearing dead trees and other impediments so that the goats can actually get in there and graze. Then they have to set up fencing, portable fencing around that area to concentrate the goats in an area so that they can achieve maximum damage. And then they may have to put guard dogs in there if you're in an area with mountain lions to keep the mountain lions from eating the goats so that the goats can eat the star thistle. And then if you've got more than one area, they have to pick all that stuff up, all that temporary fencing, move it over another area, reset it up, move the goats, so on and so forth, maybe several times. So the cost can be considerable, even if you'll have only one patch to do it. The goats actually eat about 10% of their body weight per day, so that's pretty good. And they'll not only eat the star thistle, but they'll also eat Himalayan blackberry, and they'll also eat poison oak. So that's pretty cool. And the another thing is that because they have a very efficient digestive system, not much, if any, of the seed actually passes through them in their droppings to recontaminate and reseed an area. It takes them about 1 to 3 days to actually clear an area. Grazing will not, again, eliminate or provide long-term management of star thistle. It's best used in an integrated management program. It's most valuable for its potential to increase the effectiveness of other control mechanisms. In other words, you knock the stuff down and kind of get it damaged, and you come in with something else. Grazing, once again, in the rosette stage, actually selects for star thistle because the goats can't graze it down, or whatever you're using, can't graze it down in that rosette stage. They can't get down there to chew the plant off. So let's look at herbicides as the next control mechanism. And here I talked about mower skips. This guy's out spraying something here to control the star thistle, but he probably mowed that area last year. Look at that kind of that low depression there, right in the foreground. That's full of star thistle skeletons. So he had a mower skip there, and you can see some other patches out there where it looks like you have some skeletons, which are probably low areas or dips in the ground. He got mower skips there too. Didn't come back and control the star thistle. That reseeded the area, and away he goes. So he's out spraying this year. Okay. So there are a couple of chemicals that can be used. And there are post-emergents, and then there are pre-post-emergents. We're going to talk about those, and we're talk about some warnings as well. So these are post-emergent herbicides, and there are 2 basic types. The first 3, 2,4-D, which is usually, that's weed begone, dicamba, which can be in weed begone, Bayer weed killer, and others, and triclopyr or triclopyr, however you wish to pronounce that, which is like an ortho poison ivy and brush killer, Bayer brush killer, and so on and so forth. These are all selective herbicides. They will kill nothing but broadleaf weeds, which star thistle is a broadleaf weed. So they won't kill the grasses, in other words. And that can be an effective a bit of knowledge, because you can go out there and spray these. You'll kill the star thistle, you'll kill other broadleaf weeds, but if there are grasses present, they won't kill it. And so it leaves at least some coverage on your ground instead of just wide open ground. Glyphosate, however, is a non-selective weed killer. It kills pretty much everything. So if you use that, your decision was I'm going to kill everything. And broadleaf weeds, grasses, the whole 9 yards, it'll kill it all. The problem with that is then it leaves the soil bare, and that opens you up to all kinds of other problems, because what you will get reinfested with something, and it may be something even worse than what you were trying to get rid of. Okay. So these then are all selective herbicides, except the Roundup, which is non-selective. So there's little or no residual activity in the soil for all these. They are a contact herbicide. They have to actually touch the growing plant to kill it. They have no effect to the seed in the ground that has not yet germinated. They must be reapplied after pretty much every rainfall and every new flush of star thistle. They have to be reapplied. So that can be a real problem. Drift is a common problem with all of these. So you need to apply it when the wind speed is generally 5 miles per hour or less. Less is better. Calm is even better yet. And that's generally in the early morning hours. If you're going to spray in the early morning, one thing you have to realize is that if you have a heavy dew on the grass or on the plants, and you spray on your herbicide, that's going to mix with the dew. It's going to oversaturate, and a lot of it's just going to run off, and you'll get very little control whatsoever. So you want a morning when you haven't got any dew. That's the best, or very little dew, so that you'll get maximum stickiness onto that plant that you're trying to kill. When you spray, you need to keep your sprayer head down as low to the ground as possible. because if you don't, you've got any wind, again, you're going to get drift. Don't go out there and waving that wand around all over the place, because the drift will carry it, and you'd be surprised if you get a wind speed of 5 miles per hour or more, that it will cause that drift or herbicide to drift off of your property and onto your neighbors. And if your neighbors has a nice bunch of vegetables growing or horticultural plants growing, and that drifting herbicide gets on his or her plants and kills them, they're not going to be very happy. So, and they might require you to pay to replace all that stuff you just killed. So keep your wand head as low as you can to still be effective and eliminate that drift problem. So these are the amounts of 2,4-D and dicamba, and I'll show you a couple on another slide for the other ones. The concentration it takes to get effective kill of the star thistle, and AI stands for active ingredient. So the best control, you can read these, but the main thing you want to take from this is that when you get the plants early, it takes less concentration of the herbicide to get control, to kill the plant. The longer you wait, the more herbicide you've got to use in order to kill the plant. Okay, and that translates into just using more herbicide, which I shouldn't be doing because it's getting on the ground too and causing other problems, and it's also more expensive. You know, look, you may have to double your concentration to get the same kill if you wait to spray in the bolting stage as opposed to the rosette stage. And this is it then for triclopyr or for glyphosate as well. So your strategy, what's your strategy with using the herbicide? Again, do you want to kill all the vegetation or just some of it? If you want to kill it all, Roundup's your guy. Go out there and wipe it out. If you only want to kill some, then you want the 2,4-D, the dicamba, the triclopyr, something like that. Again, unless your property is covered with star thistle, then you know what you're going to spray. But if you're talking about patches and areas like that, then you go out in the winter, look for the skeletons from the previous year's growth, and that's the area where you're going to concentrate your spraying. And you're going to be looking for it in the rosette stage. Remember that using one herbicide repeatedly can result in herbicide resistance. That's where the star thistle, basically, that herbicide no longer will kill it. So if you go out there and you've been spraying with 2,4-D just to pick something, and you continue to spray that and you're getting killed, but all of a sudden you get some kill, but you still see some plants that aren't being killed by it. Those plants have become herbicide resistant, and you need to get out there and kill them with something. Pull them up, use a different spray, do something, because if you don't, those plants are producing herbicide resistant seed, and that seed then will grow and produce herbicide resistant plants. So you don't want to do that. Now, it used to be back a number of years ago where the 2,4-D, for example, Weed Be Gone was basically 2,4-D. That's all it had. And other herbicides only had dicamba or only had triclopyr. So it was pretty easy to rotate those with that, and even with Roundup, to get control and not develop herbicide resistance. And I used to do that all the time. Anymore, they're mixing multiple herbicides into it. So for example, Weed Be Gone now contains not only 2,4-D, but usually most solutions or concentrations of it also contain dicamba. So if you look at the list of active ingredients in there, it'll say, and I'm just pulling a number out, 5% 2,4-D, 1% dicamba. That makes it harder to rotate. Okay, so it's harder to keep the star thistle off balance. The main thing to take away from this is be aware that herbicide resistance can develop. If you see that happening, destroy those plants. Don't let them go to seed. So that was the post-emergent herbicides. Now I'm going to talk about the pre-post-emergent herbicides, of which there are two. Chlorpyrolid or transline is one, and then Aminopyroid or milestone is the other. So Chlorpyrolid, transline, also sold under the name of Yellow Starthistle killer. It kills most members of the sunflower family, and Starthistle is in the sunflower family, and the legume or pea family. So that means if you're spraying this around and you got artichokes, which is a thistle, you don't want to spray it on the artichokes, it'll kill them. If you have sunflowers growing, you don't want to spray it on the sunflowers, it'll kill them. If you got peas growing, don't spray it on the peas, it'll kill them. If you got clover, alfalfa, vetch as ground covers, for example, or fodder, don't spray it on that. It'll kill them. All right. Aminopyroid, on the other hand, or milestone, it kills sunflower family and pea family plants also, but it will also kill some annual grasses and some other broadleaf weeds as well. So with that one, I would tell you certainly read the label to see what it kills and what it doesn't kill before you spray, because I don't remember what all they are. All right. So let's look at Chlorpyrolid transline first. It provides both pre and post-emergent control, which is cool. It's most effective if it's put on in February and March. At that time, you do not need to include a surfactant. Okay, Steve, so what's a surfactant? It is something, it's basically, it's almost like detergent, like a soap. What it does is it helps the herbicide stick to the plant, and it helps it to penetrate into the plant, so you get better kill. If you use this stuff in February and March, you don't have to use a surfactant. The reason you want to use it then is it has only a post-emergent control of about 3 to 4 months. So if you put it on in November, say, you'll get November, December, January, and February control. Then you're going to have to reapply it for the rest of the season. Even if you put it on in January, you get January, February, March, and April, but you may get rains in May, so you won't get full coverage. So what you want to do is put it on February and March. That will kill everything that's come up. Remember, it has post-emergent kill capabilities. So anything that's come up will be killed by it. And then anything that would have come up will not come up because it's got pre-emergent control. Earlier applications, as I've said, may not provide full control over the season. You'll have to reapply it. Later applications, as if you wait until April or May, when the plant is now more fully developed, will require not only higher concentrations of the transline, but you'll also have to use a surfactant. Okay, and because the post-emergent control is very weak, if you wait until the plants are more well developed, i.e. April and May and on into June, you may not get control at all, even if you put it on higher concentrations and use the surfactant. So use it when you're supposed to use it. It works like a charm. Use it out of the window, it doesn't work quite as well. It's best applied right after a rain, but you need 24 hours between rains. So you need 24 dry hours after a rain. And quite frankly, I would prefer 72 hours after the rain before the next rain comes to apply it, but a minimum of 24 hours and after a rain. The advantages then, 3 to 4 months of pre-emergent control. It kills hardly anything but star thistle, sunflower family, in other words, in most legumes. It's used at very low application rates, 4 to 8 ounces per acre, which isn't very much, but it's kind of expensive. So you don't want to use very much. And it has no known toxicity to animals. It will hurt alfalfa and clover crops, as we've already said. Livestock that graze on treated material, it can excrete the active compound. So again, if you, for example, have them grazing out there on an area that's been treated with transline, and then you move them over into an area to graze on an area where you have clover, vetch, alfalfa growing, they may excrete that compound onto those crops, and it will damage, if not destroy, those crops. So you don't want to do that. You do not want to spray it within 25 feet of a water body. Okay, it gets into the water body and affects organisms that grow in there. It moves around in sandy soils, so you may spray it in one area with sandy soils, and it will leach over into other areas where you may not have wanted it. Do not use it on potential grape planting sites, and I don't know right exactly what it does. Obviously, it doesn't do anything for the grapes, so it probably damages them or prevents them from growing, so you don't want to do that. And do not dispose of treated material clippings into your compost, because it may not fully break down. And then if you use that compost again into an area where you're trying to grow sunflowers, peas, artichokes, that sort of thing, or cover crops of clover, vetch, alfalfa, that sort of thing, they may not grow. Okay. The disadvantages of Chlorpyrol, then, again, it kills most legumes. That can lead, legumes or nitrogen fixing organisms, plants, they take nitrogen from the air and fix it into the soil. If you kill them all off and keep them killed off, you can eventually lead to nitrogen depletion in the soil, in which case you're either going to have to plant them again, or you're going to have to provide nitrogen from some kind of fertilizer. Chlorpyrolid, again, transline, is not registered for use around the home or in crop areas, so don't do that. You need an applicator's license and a grower ID number. How do I get that, Steve? Well, I call that number right there, 621-5520. That's the ag department. They will set up an appointment for you. You will come into that appointment, in which case there's no test, okay? They will come in, they will give you a briefing on what you can and can't do with the stuff. And then they will give you, you have to give them the parcel number, by the way, when you set up the appointment. And then they will give you an applicator's license. You then take that applicator's license down to wherever they're selling transline. Here it's, what is it, the cooperative over here on Missouri Flat Road. What's it called? Can't think of the name of it. I tell you, the older you get, the worse your mind becomes. Anyway, you go down there. I'll think of it in a minute, probably. You go down there, you show them your applicator's license. They say, fine, that's wonderful. And then they will sell you the product. No applicator's license, no product, all right? Once you start spraying that, you have to file reports with the ag department of how much you sprayed, where you sprayed it, concentration sprayed, and all that sort of thing. So it's kind of a pain, but that's what you got to do if you're going to use it. Remember, just like the other herbicides, star thistle can develop resistance to transline. So you want to just be aware of that. And if you see stuff coming up there after you've sprayed and you still got stuff coming up, still growing, then you may have a problem there. So how about Aminopyroid? I'm having a little throat problems here. Aminopyroid provides, again, both pre and post-emergent control, and its the most effective timing is December. Application is December and through February, because it provides 4 to 5 months of pre-emergent control as opposed to 3 to 4 months for transline. Again, if you put it on too early, then you'll have to spray it on again. And you put it on too late, it's less effective. You have to use higher concentrations, and waiting too long, way too long, you won't get killed. Again, soil activity 4 to 5 months. It kills many broadleaf weeds, thistle, fiddleneck, ragweeds, and others. Again, read the label and it'll tell you exactly what, as well as the star thistle. Again, a low application rate, 3 to 7 ounces per acre if you put it on the time you're supposed to put it on. It has no known toxicity to animals, and it can be used right up to the water's edge, but do not spray it into the water. I will repeat that. Do not spray it into the water. The disadvantage, once again, you need an ag license, just like Chlorpyrolid, so call that phone number. It can be excreted from livestock as an active chemical. Don't use it in potential grape planting areas. Do not use where loss of legumes or other broadleafs cannot be tolerated. It can, and then one that isn't true with transline is it can damage newly sowing perennial grasses. And that means if you go out there and you're eliminating your star thistle problem with using this product, or you use some other product, and you want to sow that area now with perennial grasses to, so let's just say you use Roundup and killed everybody, and then you go out there and sow the area of perennial grasses to provide cover for that land so other things don't get in there, including more star thistle. And now you start to see some star thistle remnants seed popping up in your newly germinated perennial grasses. And you say, whoops, let's go out and I'm going to use Aminopyroid milestone and get rid of that star thistle. Don't, because it can damage newly sown and germinated perennial grasses. Once they get up for over a year or so, then it's okay. But when they're newly germinated, you may damage or even kill them. So you might want to try transline then. And again, star thistle can develop resistance. Remember for both of these products that the post-emergent control is slow. So you may put it on at the regulated time. You have star thistle out there in the cotyledonous, the early seedling, and in the early rosette stages, and you see it there, and it doesn't seem like you're getting a kill. You probably will. It's very slow. The post-emergent control here of these products is slow. And what more can I say? And if and again, if the plants are too well developed late in the season to where you're not getting any control at all, then you may have to go back and either use one of the selective herbicides, the weed begons and whatnot, or if you want to go out and kill everything, you use Roundup, or you can also use Roundup as a spot treatment where you're just killing it on the star thistle. Cost obviously can be a factor in this because this product is not particularly cheap. And like it says there, it can take 2 weeks to show signs of death. And I'll tell you, in the wintertime, it can take longer than that. In fact, even using the post-emergence in the wintertime, the kill is quite slow. And the colder it is, the slower the kill rate. Oops. So, herbicide warnings. Before using any herbicide, read the label. What did I just say? Before using any herbicide, read the label. Please read the label. Okay, that's what it's there for. You're looking for the application rate, for the timing, what it's effective against, and any precautions that you might use, which could be precautions using it around other plants, or it could be precautions about getting it on you, okay? Drift precautions, all those things. Read the label. You need to do that. That's why it's on there. Please read the label. Have I beat that to death? Know what's in the field when you're using these herbicides, any of them. You can kill the star thistle, but you can allow something worse to come in and take over. Here's a couple of them here. Other things would be a bindweed, tarweed would be another one. Even Himalayan blackberry in some instances can get into there too, and probably other things that are almost as bad, just as bad, or worse than star thistle. So let's talk about biocontrols. Biocontrols are basically just the use of natural enemies to control pest populations. And in fact, star thistle, as I think I mentioned before, is not a problem in its native habitat. There are about 42 natural enemies of star thistle in the Eastern Mediterranean area where it originated. So it's not a problem there. Does it grow? Yes. Does it reproduce? Yes. But do you have these massive stands of it? No, because these natural enemies keep it under control and eliminate its ability to spread and become a problem. You take that star thistle out of its native environment and putting it where it has natural enemies and put it into an environment where it has no natural enemies, but it's the same climate, i.e. Mediterranean, you got a problem, as we can see here in California and throughout much of the West now. So you say, well, then, geez, why don't we just gather up all those 42 natural enemies and bring them over here and turn them loose, and we'll have the problem under control? Well, maybe. The problem with that is some of those natural enemies may like peaches or beans or something else just as well as they like star thistle, or maybe better. And so they attack that stuff too, or exclusively because they like it better than star thistle. So now you've created a problem, a really bad problem. So it's very important to find among those natural enemies ones that are specific to star thistle, and will attack nothing else. And those are the ones then you want to bring in and introduce. So initially, 6 insects were developed or were identified that could be imported that do attack only star thistle. The hairy weevil, which is the one at right, the bud weevil, the flower weevil, the gall fly, the peacock fly, and the false peacock fly. And those have been now turned loose and have been in the area for many, many years. By the way, as you can probably note from these insects are very, very small. They're not great big bugs. They're very small. Recently, these all attack the flower head, either destroying the flower head itself, the flower, the seed that is inside the flower head. It all has something to do with the flower head. That's how they destroy the star thistle. Recently, like in the last 2 years, a new insect has been released, and that's called the Rosette Weevil. And it's different in that it attacks the rosette, okay, which might be a more effective way, actually, because you haven't developed any seed. You kill it down there before it's developed any seed, you really have eliminated your problem. So here's some pictures of them. The hairy weevil, the star thistle, bud weevil, the flower weevil, the gall fly, and the false peacock fly. And I don't have a picture of the peacock fly, but I guess it kind of looks like a false peacock fly. I don't have a picture of the rosette weevil. So what's the efficacy of these guys? Well, the insects that they were released initially have been not particularly effective. They do attack the star thistle, and in small patches they can control it. But the problem is we have a massive infestation of star thistle, and it's just virtually impossible for these insects to get out there and kill all the seeds and all the flowers that are on 15 million acres of star thistle. So are they doing what they're supposed to do? Yeah, they are. But are they going to destroy all the star thistle? Probably not. The fungus hasn't been very effective at all. So, yes, they're widespread, and the rosette weevil will probably become widespread, but by themselves, they are not going to eliminate the problem. What we need to do is find some way to get the concentration of star thistle down to where the insects then have a chance to actually provide effective control. So what I'm saying is that biocontrols alone are not going to be the ultimate solution. So what about manual control? And that includes hand pulling, hoeing, weed whipping. They can all be effective. I wouldn't really recommend weed whipping. It's just, I wouldn't recommend it. I'll tell you why in a minute. They're good for use on small populations or isolated infestations, but you're not going to go out there in a big, if you've got 3 acres and it's covered with star thistle, you're not going to go out there and hoe it up. You're not going to go out there and hand pull it. And if you do it weed whipping, you're going to have to whip it down to the ground, and then it's going to grow back. And if you try to whip it when it's already got viable seeds on it, you're going to spread the seeds hither, thither, and yon, and you just make the problem worse. So I don't like weed whipping particularly, but for small infestations, small areas, yeah, these all work pretty well. They can also be used to eliminate survivors from other control mechanisms. So you get out there, you kill out most of the problem, but you got things popping up here and there. Then you can go out and hand pull it, hoe it up, or something that I do. Something that I do is when I find star thistle growing in my yard, And I do. I mean, it's basically empty, but occasionally I'll get one pop up because birds fly over, deer, raccoons, rabbits, track stuff in. And I go out there. I have just one of those little quart bottles, spray bottles, and I mix up some whatever herbicide I'm using, and I go out there, and if I can pull it up early in the season, I pull it up. If I pull it up and it breaks off, I spray either the growth crown or the root tip, and that will kill it. Or if I can't, neither one of those really works, then I just spray the plant. Just right there, that plant, that's all I spray. You can use that too once you get control. And so if you just have spot problems, then you can use that same thing. What about competition then? One of the control mechanism strategies you can use is to use the transline or the milestone to basically eliminate the star thistle. Then and it takes usually a 2-year period. So you spray 1 year, and you come back and spray a 2nd year, and then after that you will reseed with perennial grasses, with legumes, clovers, vetches, and things like that, to then hopefully outcompete the star thistle. And if it does pop up, you can use pulling the hand pulling, the spot spraying, and things like that to get rid of it. Okay, so but using plant competition all by itself is probably not going to work unless you get some kind of control of the star thistle, and then it can compete with it. It eliminates the massive stands, and then you can better handle the survivors that come up. Once again you achieve star thistle control, particularly if you've used Roundup where you've killed everything, again you got to replace that with something. Overseed it with perennial grasses and with clovers and this sort of thing. Otherwise, you're just going to get reinfested with that or something else. Your actual choice of what you're going to replace it with, you need to consider what the site conditions are, the management that you're willing to use, future uses of the land, all these sorts of things will need to be considered. So perennial grasses, I already talked about those. They can be used, but the seedlings are slow to establish. And in the initial seedling stage, it can be easily outcompeted by the star thistle. So you got to keep that star thistle under control until those grasses get developed. And once they're developed, then they will effectively compete with the star thistle. You get down to where you have spot star thistle growing. And once again, you can do that with pulling and spot spraying. And again, usually 2 years to get your control. Legumes must be seeded very, very heavily in order to create a dense enough stand or coverage to establish a control. They tend to leave open spots, and those open spots then are candidates for star thistle or something else to grow in. Also, legumes tend to decline over time. That is, they begin to open up, and again, you get these open spaces, which again then allow the return of star thistle. So you got to watch that and then overseed again to keep that coverage density high. So with that then, you want to, I guess competition, that's what I'm trying to say. You want to use plants that either have vigorous cool season growth, so they will be shading the star thistle seedlings and the rosettes, and hopefully they continue to grow fairly late into the season. You want deep rooted systems, if you can find those, with warm season growth, so they will compete with the star thistle for that deep soil moisture, which tends to then inhibit the star thistle's growth. You can use trees and shrubs that will shade the site and develop competitive root systems, again, to reduce the availability of moisture to the star thistle, or to produce leaf litter, which acts as a mulch, which again shades the star thistle and inhibits its growth. So all those sorts of things. So this then is a slide. The right-hand one you've already seen. It's development stages. The left-hand one shows you, and usually I give this as a handout also, shows the control measures when they're most effectively used. For example, cultivation, seeding, herbicides, used effective then in the seedling and the rosette stages and on in the early vegetative, grazing at floral bud, mowing and burning at floral bud, and more in the flower stage. And then once the seed is formed, then nothing is really very effective. And certainly once the seed is mature, then there are no really effective control mechanisms. You're just done that year. If you haven't controlled, if you haven't prevented seed development and maturation at that point, you might as well hang it up, go home, have a beer, and plan what you're going to do next year, or give up entirely, whatever. So finally, then the last section then is strategic planning for control. It's really important to develop a plan, a strategic plan, if you will. You need to know what your long-term objectives are. Do you want to completely eliminate the star thistle, or manage the current infestation so it doesn't get any worse, or contain the current infestation in the areas it is currently in? Or do you want to prevent star thistle from contaminating your property in the first place? In other words, you don't have it right now. So what is your long-term objective? Are there management limitations? For example, what can you do? What are you willing to do? How much do you want to spend? What can't you do? What is the situation with your neighbors and bordering properties? Are they infested? Are they willing to join the program with you to eliminate it? If not, are they willing to let you work in that 5 to 10 foot border area? How much time and money are you willing to spend? Okay, all those things. You need to think about them. What is the extent of the infestation? Does it cover your whole property? Or is it limited to just some areas? Or are there just patches here and there versus large areas? What is the condition of the plants? Are they large and bushy or spindly? Look at last year's skeletons again to determine what it's going to be this year and where the location of the infestation is if it isn't apparent. All those sorts of things. And whether last year's plants are bushy or spindly, which is the skeletons are going to tell you that. You need to know the biology of the plant. Well, we just spent about an hour and a half or so talking about that, so I hope something has soaked in. And then know the biology of the ecosystem. For example, what plants and animals are in the ecosystem? What is their susceptibility to the various control mechanisms that you're planning to use to control the star thistle? And then if they're going to be affected, is that important? Or can you sacrifice some or all of them in order to get control? Are there worse plants around that will replace the star thistle? If so, you better consider that and decide how you're going to keep them out of there. Finally, you need to coordinate your efforts among the interested parties. That is, are your neighbors' properties infested? Are they interested in controlling star thistle on their property and joining you in the battle? That's great. If they are not, then again, will they allow you to try to control star thistle in that band along your property, which will help you keep your property clear of star thistle. Oops, So develop a plan then. What are you willing to spend in time, in money, in priorities? If your priority is to watch football games on Saturday and Sunday afternoon, go up to Tahoe, and you don't want to be bothered with all this stuff out there, you're working during the week, you don't want to be bothered with the weekend, well then forget it. You're doomed. You're not going to win the battle. You have to be able to develop the resources, time, money, and set your priorities. For a while, my priority is going to be to kill this darn star thistle and get rid of it. You've got to develop a multi-year plan. Remember, it's not one and done. It's not even 3 and done. It's about 7 and done, but continued monitoring at that point. You need to integrate the tools you can use, whether that be mechanical, cultural, or chemical. You may have to integrate various facets of that, or various types of control mechanisms, depending on the point you are in your control efforts. If your emphasis is on prevention, then you need to concentrate on how is it being introduced or reintroduced by animals, on mowers or farm implements. Horse feed can do it. Fill or landscape materials, or is this just a natural stand? Are you creating a susceptible environment by improper control actions, or by weed control efforts, or by mowing for fire prevention, or overgrazing? All those things create a susceptible landscape. You need to detect and monitor populations, yours and your neighbors, so you don't get reinfested. And then finally, you need to educate, not only your education, which hopefully this is doing, but your neighbors. You need to educate them, or at least try to. It may not always work. So then if your goal is, again, follow-up eradication, if your goal is eradications, then you need to have an early identification of the problem, rapid response to prevent seed reduction, the proper use of control methods, and site monitoring. Is the plan working? And if the plan isn't working, why isn't it working? And can I fix it? And if the answer is yes, fix it. If the answer is no, maybe I need to develop a new plan. Okay. You need to follow up to prevent reinfestation, which I've said, I know, probably 30 or 40 times now. If you don't monitor and follow up, I can guarantee you, you will be reinfested. So then what do I need to remember then about yellow star thistle? Well, it has multiple flushes. It has deep roots. The plants can regrow. The plants die off late. They produce a lot of seeds, and the plant is tenacious. So what you can think about, there are numerous successful control options. You just need to find the one that's going to work, or one or ones that are going to work for you. The key is to long-term success. You got to deplete the seed bank. If you don't do that, you will never gain control. And then you must prevent new seed recruitment, either from off-site or from on-site. Even if you deplete the seed bank, if you allow seed to be reintroduced, you're just going to start the cycle all over again. You need to monitor and detect star thistle plants and new star thistle plants and populations, and prevent them from producing seeds. You need to do a spot treatment or follow-up program. Remember that little spray bottle is one effective way. And you may need to use an integrated program using competitive perennial grasses to be effective. That is something else to think about. Finally, I'd like to leave you with this, as my voice is giving out. You must be as tenacious as the star thistle. If you're not, you lose. These are some publications which you can get. I'm going to rattle on here for a minute so you have time to read these. These used to be free. Nothing is free anymore, but you can go online. I think there's a couple of online sites there that are listed, or you can actually come into the cooperative extension too if you want. And sometimes they have them. You'll have to pay for them. They run, I don't know, anywhere from $1 or $2 up to perhaps as much as $5. Well worth it to read these. Much of the material I've given you is in these publications. Finally, thank you for the privilege of your time. I hope you were willing to spend the whole time with me. And a final, good luck.